Yeah, hi Ruben, we have a little chat. We had a little chat earlier, and there's a few questions I'm very keen on getting some answers for you. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Rueben Scriven. I'm the research manager at Interact Analysis. So we're a market research company focusing primarily on supply chain automation. Myself, I'm responsible for our warehouse and robotics research practice. So we're looking at warehouse automation, robotics, components in mobile robotics. We're sort of very well established in the robotics space now, so we're working with 8 of the top 10 industrial robot companies. We're the official research partner for A3, working for MHI as well, so kind of very ingrained into the robotics ecosystem. And most recently, we've been doing a lot of research in the humanoid space, so trying to understand, what are the current deployments look like, what does the long-term adoption look like, what are the main barriers to entry, right? There are so many barriers right now that will prevent widespread adoption, so how can the industry come together to try and bring down those barriers? So that's kind of what we do, and specifically what my main focus has been over the last couple of months.
And do you think the discussions about these kind of things are very open? Is it hard for you guys to get some answers or to get people collaborate with you and provide because it's two sides, right?
Yeah.
The robot manufacturers, so the OEMs and the entire ecosystem around that, but then on the other side, the companies, mid-sized, smaller ones, but yeah, especially when it comes to the more expensive one, the larger companies, mass adoption and volume. How is that for you?
I see your point, and in general, I think there is a bit of a murky image of market research, especially when you're trying to communicate to so many companies. But when you've kind of built your company around confidentiality, then being a fly in the wall of the industry is actually a very beneficial thing for companies, right? So we'll talk to companies, we'll keep the information confidential, and then we share back to these companies what's happening in the wider industry perspective at the aggregate level. And I think right now, given like you say, right, a lot of mid-sized companies, there needs to be that transparency in the industry about what's going on, even if individual companies' proprietary information has remained confidential. So I think it's a really important thing. There are some other really good market research companies around here that are doing this, and having that transparency is key in this industry right now, given the fact that no one's quite figured out exactly what that product will look like, what the form factor will be. Will it be a fully generalized robot, or will it be more kind of task-specific robots? So sharing the information from the different companies, trying to aggregate that view, how many sweets in a cookie jar kind of approach here to the forward-looking scenarios, I think provides a lot of transparency for the future.
When we look at the market at the moment, and we see how soon a lot of products and how young a lot of companies are, and then you look on the other side, some traditional companies, some robot companies that had been in the business for decades, right? And automation is pretty advanced for, let's say, automotive, right?
Yeah.
There's not too much space. So there's a reason why humanoids are so interesting, because the things that are not automated are because they had been not be possible to automate, right? And now looking at those things and getting an understanding and feeling what this space, right? Can we talk about deployments? Can we talk about actual situation? Where are we standing? Where's the technology? Where's the adoption happening?
Yeah, so I mean, there is a big deviation between the hype that's in the media right now in terms of the number of deployments versus the actual number of deployments. So we estimate it to be around 140 deployments globally of humanoid robots. And
say again, please.
140, and that includes research institutes as well. So not just in commercial settings. When it comes to
here?
Sorry,
percentage here.
Vast majority in research institutes. Commercial settings that go beyond proof of concept will be a very, very small fraction of that.
Thanks for being so, sorry for interrupting you, but thanks for being so precise, so people get an understanding what kind of scale, what kind of volume are we talking about, right? So many humanoid companies, so many companies talking about deployment and will be in your home, will be in manufacturing very soon, and then here's some actual factual numbers, right?
So what we're not saying is that the market's not going to be big in the future, right? We have long-term growth potential in this market. I think what we need to do to avoid there being a situation where the industry gets too overhyped is trying to anchor back into reality, right? So there are a lot of barriers that will prevent long-term adoption, or widespread adoption rather, especially in the homes and in commercial, rather in public settings. And until those barriers have been overcome, then it's going to be difficult for companies to deploy these. I mean, think about the insurance providers, right? Who's going to insure these robots until they have, certified standards? The way that some of the big companies got around that is they just don't insure them. And that's a very, very risky thing to do. Most companies don't have the financial capabilities to not insure a part of a warehouse or a part of a factory. So I think there are a lot of these technical barriers that need to be overcome, but really the biggest barrier is more on the regulatory side, the soft regulation in particular, so the insurance providers and whatnot. Until these have been tackled, we won't see kind of this big widespread uptick, even if the technology is there to support that.
This is a very, not provocative necessarily, but this is a very transparent conversation, so I really enjoy it. Because it shows some different part of it. Because we have a lot of entrepreneurs here, right, and a lot of VC-funded companies. So it's nice to see a little bit behind the scenes. You were talking about upside and uptake. I'm keen to get a better feeling and understanding about who would be winner, not necessarily winner and losers, but how's the situation for the different kind of countries, and what's your data. Being driven or data-driven view on that?
Yeah, sure. So the way we kind of analyze this market, I'll spend 30 seconds or so kind of walking through how we arrived at the results and then talk about the results.
Please.
Then. So to try and answer this question, what we need to do is actually understand how many employees there are that are substitutable with humanoid robots, right? So how many what we call mobile manipulation tasks there are globally across different sectors. So we collected all the government data on different workflows across different countries. Just to give you an example, there are about 16 million FTEs in US manufacturing. But if you actually drill down and look at the specific roles that make up that 16 million, only about 27% of those are substitutable with humanoid robots. So by looking at every single role globally across every country, looking at the government statistics data, it gives us an idea of what that total addressable market could be. That is about $2 trillion a year worth of humanoid sales, if you look at it from a total addressable market perspective. At what point will that $2 trillion opportunity be penetrated? Well, that's kind of the key question here.
Can I ask a side question
Please.
here? Because just to come back to the numbers, so that was 25% of the whole. You were just quoting the US market.
That's just the US. I mean, if we look at the US, right, where manufacturing is very automated, a large portion of the workforce are actually going to be technicians. They're going to be engineers who manage the automation itself. Now, they're not going to be substitutable with a humanoid robot. Whereas if you look at somewhere like Vietnam, where you have a much more manual workforce, the share of employees within the total manufacturing labor force will be more substitutable with humanoid robots, but then the salaries will be so low that the ROI is not going to make sense. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach where you've got to look at what is that addressable market, but also what is the labor costs associated with that. And that's really where our analysis comes into play, because we're marrying up those two data sets together, the labor costs and the total addressable market. So back to your point, who are going to be the winners and losers? From a company perspective, we really see that the companies that are really focusing on product market fit will be the ones that will win. So there are a lot of companies that are really trying to set relatively unfeasible expectations, and it's rightly so, right? If you're in a room where everyone's shouting, you want to be shouting loud as well. The issue is with that is that these companies are not prioritizing product market fit as much as they are around kind of media in many cases. Whereas some of the kind of quiet companies, the companies that aren't necessarily screaming and shouting, but are really, really focused on this one particular workflow in a particular environment, who can then scale out to other workflows, those are the companies that we see having the strongest likelihood of succeeding in the short to mid-term. I would be relatively controversial in saying this, but we are most likely going to experience a collapse of a bubble in the humanoid space. I know this is somewhat controversial, but the hype that the industry is giving, not least by a lot of the financial institutions that were saying it's going to be a $10 trillion market by 2035, or whatever this data point is, they're setting expectations where investors are pouring money into this, and as soon as they realize actually the expectations are too high and what we're getting in return is not as high as we thought, then investors are going to close the taps, and then suddenly they're going to want their money back, and a lot of these companies are going to go out of business. So the companies that are being very pragmatic are focusing on safety, standards, and product market fit. These are the companies that we see will win out in the short to mid-term. In the long term, I can't predict the future. I don't know who's going to win in the long term, but certainly in the next sort of 5 or 10 years, We think the companies that are focusing on safety, regulation, and product market fit are the ones that are going to win out. From a geographic standpoint, China is going to dominate this market for two main reasons. Firstly, they've got a national robotics policy. They are trying to push manufacturing towards automation, especially with humanoid robots. They want to own the supply chain for humanoids, similar to what they did with EVs, right? So they own the EV supply chain. They will most likely own a lot of the components in the humanoid supply chain. So that's one reason. The second reason is their regulations are slightly less stringent than they are in the US and Europe. The regulations, as I mentioned earlier, are going to be the reason why we won't see as stronger uptake as we do in China. So for those two reasons combined, we will. Our data suggests that by 2032, approximately 80% of annual deployments will be in China. The US will account for the second biggest segment, but you can imagine you're playing with 20% there. It's going to be a pretty small share. In Europe, we're relatively pessimistic about long-term growth rates of humanoids in Europe, largely because of the labor laws and the union strengths. Humanoids are job loss personified, right, at the end of the day. And if you have humanoids working alongside you, it's not like a robot arm or a mobile robot where it's so abstracted to the human form, you don't necessarily see them as a direct competition to you. Mm-hmm. Whereas a humanoid form factor, it elicits more of a job security threat, sort of from a sort of human psyche perspective. So we do think that Europe will struggle more to have a widespread adoption of humanoids than they would in China and the US.
I think this was one of the most insightful conversations that we had, because it brings a totally different point of view to the topic, and not everything is written in stone, right? So there's still a lot of assumption, right? But looking at the data, and especially as a few numbers that you said, adoption, the addressable market, the situation that we have existing now and in 5 or 10 years, giving us a maybe more realistic view. I would like to see how people who are watching our little chat, especially coming from this kind of companies that are building humanoids or parts of that, components, what's their take on that, and how much is that in their focus, and how well received will that be in the game of VCs and these kind of companies, and the hype.
Exactly right, and I think I just want to sort of make it clear, we're not pessimistic on long-term growth. We think this is going to be a very big industry, but in the same way that if you were in 1998 thinking about the internet, you might say, oh, well, in 3 years' time, everyone's going to be buying online, everyone's going to be shopping, but then you had the dot-com bubble, right? Mm-hmm. We're very, very optimistic about the long-term growth rate of humanoids, and we think it could be in the same level of transformation as the internet has had on society. Mm-hmm. We're just trying to come up with a more pragmatic view here, because we want companies to thrive in this industry. And in order to do that, a bubble collapsing, it affects everyone, right? And we don't want that to happen. And in order for that not to happen, there needs to be a much more pragmatic conversation about the future of humanoids in the short to mid-term. And again, long-term is anyone's game. I'm talking specifically about the short to mid-term here.
Thanks. I can only say thanks for bringing those topics up, bringing some numbers to the table. There might be the opportunity to provide some links afterwards.
Yep.
I will talk with the organization here to see if that is possible for us. But yeah, thanks for being here.
And just to do a very selfless plug here, we've just published our in-depth market report on humanoid robots, which has a plethora of data points on insights, on interviews that we've conducted, of future projections about the market. So anyone who's looking to kind of learn a bit more about the market, they can reach out to us.
I think this is a good ending. Thank you very much, and see you on the floor.
Thank you very much.